Hello students, welcome to this mini lecture series on how to plan your marketing message. So we're going to be using marketing communications theory to look at some of the components of a message, some of the techniques we can employ to make our messaging more effective. So Phil and Turnbull actually have a textbook that's available as an ebook called Marketing Communications, and I cannot emphasize enough making use of this book. As with all textbooks, we recommend that you read them to develop an understanding, and then you refer to the journal articles that the textbook refers to deepen that understanding even further. So marketing communications, we're going to be looking at message planning and creativity. So Phil and Turnbull point out that the message is a critical aspect of marketing communications. So we need to think about what's said, how it is said, and the meaning that the audience subscribes to the message that we send. So one of the basic models of communication that has really stood the test of time is Schramm's linear model. So it has 7 steps, and the first step is identifying the source. So as marketers, whether we are working for a charity or a business, whether in a marketing department or just sort of marketing for our own business, we are the source, we are the originator of the message. So all communication starts with a source. The next step is called encoding, which is where we transfer the intended message. So what's going on in our mind, what it is we want to convey, what it is we want to say, and we put that into some sort of style. So we could write it, we could record it, we could create a video. Okay, so there's lots of symbolic styles that allow the message, that allow our intention or our thoughts to be transmitted. Then we have the signal. So this is the transmission of the message using a particular media. So you could receive a message when you're watching television. You could receive a message from a marketer when you're listening to the radio, or perhaps when you're scrolling through social media. So this is when we say, in the traditional sense, we have different types of media which are kind of the transmission for messages to be received. The next step is decoding. So this is something that happens for the audience, for the receiver of the message. They go through a process of understanding the symbolic style of the message in order to derive the actual intentions behind it. So for example, if you couldn't read, you would not be able to read the messages, the marketing messages in a newspaper. Perhaps you could take some meaning from the pictures, but you wouldn't be able to use the symbolic style of handwriting to actually decode that part of the message from the sender. So we also need to think about the receiver, who is actually receiving the message from the organisation. So again, with broadcast, that could be many different types of people, all different ages, backgrounds, incomes, languages. So depending on the type of media that we use and the way we craft our message, we can sometimes get our message to a very specific person, or sometimes it could be received by a variety of different types of people. The next stage is feedback. So we then need to consider the receiver's communication back to the source of the message. So in the old days, this might have been readers writing into the newspaper in response, or perhaps getting in touch with the company or the organisation to order a product. So now, today, with social media, we know it's very, very different. The moment a brand does anything, announces anything, or perhaps does not live up to its service that it's promised, we can communicate directly back to the brand and to other consumers via social media. And finally, the final stage to consider when we're planning our messaging and understanding how messaging works is noise. So noise is a distortion of the communication process. It's things getting in the way. It's noise, it's other messages, it's distractions that can stop our message from being received or being received clearly by the intended source. So this information is available and further reading on page 67 of the Phil and Turnbull textbook, Marketing Communications. So I highly recommend that you dive in and explore more about the basic model of communication so we understand the theory that our message planning fits within. So Theodorson and Theodorsson sum up quite nicely looking at Schramm's model, they describe that this is a linear model, one that emphasizes transmission of information, ideas, attitudes, or emotion from one person or a group to others, to another or others, primarily through symbols. So again, that really nicely sums up what we mean by communication of messages. So we have a sender, a receiver, we have that encoding process using symbols to carry the message from one to the other. But putting our critical thinking hats on, we should really ask ourselves, is Schramm's model still relevant? So this model was created back in 1955. A lot of what we use in marketing today has been borrowed from psychology and adapted into consumer psychology. I believe that much of Schramm's model is still relevant, but we do need to understand that when it was created, it was in an era of broadcast media. So back in 1955, I'm not even sure how many households would have had a television, or whether people were still listening to what we would call the wireless or the radio. So at the time that this model was written, communication in terms of from a marketing perspective was very much from one to many. So you're communicating like perhaps it was one or very few channels, broadcast channels, and they had the attention of a huge, diverse, varied audience. So I believe the key stages are still relevant, but the world has changed. We now, since early 2000s, have a situation where people can very easily broadcast their own messages. You guys probably broadcast your own messages every day when you post on your social media channels. We can all create a free YouTube channel and become broadcasters ourselves. So we can now co-create brand value. We can leave reviews. We can discuss the value of a product or a service with other users. So the times have changed very much. So there are definitely still relevant elements, and we can still learn from Schramm's model, but we have to hold in our mind that technology has changed and the availability of different media has changed. So let's move on to looking at crafting your message. So again, there are many key stages to consider when crafting an effective message, or making sure that your thoughts, your intention is received clearly and as accurately as possible by your audience. So one of the first steps, and the most important, is to understand your audience. If you do not know who they are, what they care about, how they think, then you may find that when you communicate your message, it is misunderstood or it's not received because the person isn't interested. Another key step is to provide value to your audience. If your audience cannot see the value in listening to you, of taking notice, then with all of this noise and messages from other organizations and people, you will not be heard. So we need to know what our audience values. So an extension of understanding the audience, but also we then need to take it a step further and think, how can we provide value to the audience whose attention we want? It's also really important to have specific tasks for each message, otherwise we are just making noise. So when we communicate, we have to think very carefully, why am I communicating? What is the task of this message? We also have it's also important to have a very specific engagement desire. So if I'm going to have a message, it has a very specific task. I know what I'm trying to do with this message. What do I want the audience to do? How do I want them to engage with the message? So we'll be covering that in more detail shortly. Another important technique to develop is a creative technique. Again, we are in competition for attention. There's lots of noise, there's lots of other messages trying to be heard. And so one of the ways we can make sure that we're standing out and that we're gaining and holding people's attention is by developing a creative technique. And this can really enhance the absorption of our message. Next, we need to consider the message components. To explain this, I like to think about a child, like young children, and how they can be very, very blunt because they haven't yet learned the art of subtlety. So rather than, an introduction and preamble and then asking you a question, quite often a small child might ask a question that an adult would blush, an adult would find embarrassing because it's not the done thing to ask, because children don't have that skill set yet of constructing a message and knowing how to ask something or how to say something. They say what's on their mind. So when we consider our message components, how can we make sure all of the key elements are in the message so it's received the way we would like it to be received? We also need to be aware of our own credibility as the message sender and how we can leverage the credibility of others to help our message to be trusted and to be received and to be retained. And finally, we need to consider the different messages that we broadcast to our audience or that we engage with in our audience throughout their customer journey. So we might have different messages at different stages for the customer journey. So in this particular mini lecture, we're going to focus on understanding the audience. So generally when we're talking about the audience, especially in this particular module, we have been very focused on the consumer, the person who will be consuming the services or the product that your Positive Impact Project offers. But in marketing communications, we need to be aware that there are actually many audiences. So when we're planning the communication for a company or a charity, we have to be aware of all the different audiences and all of the different stakeholders. So let's say, for example, you're planning a festival. Yes, you need to sell tickets, but you also need to communicate with people who will have stalls, people who will sell food, people who provide security. You'll have to communicate with the local council. So again, stakeholder analysis and having specific messages for specific different audiences is very important. You might also have a positive impact project that has more than one audience in that you're working with charities and you're working with volunteers. So again, you need to think, okay, I've got some B2B or, even though it's not business, organization to organization communication going on. And I've got some B2C communication going on. So you have two distinct audiences. And then again, you can break your audience down even further still. So let's say we were looking at consumers of our service as a charity. They could be current consumers. We might have a campaign or a message for people that have interacted with us in the past but are not at the moment, so they're lapsed consumers. We might have a very special message for people who have never encountered the service that we offer, so we need to give them lots of information about that. Or we might be trying to encourage somebody who is already consuming the service that we offer, but from a competitor, from another organisation. So we might want to differentiate ourselves and say why we are better. So when we're thinking about our audiences, we need to open our minds and understand that the audience means more than the consumers. We have other organisations, bodies and stakeholders that we need to communicate with. So now let's move on to look at how we can make our message engaging with an understanding of the audience. So it's really important to get into the mindset of our audience and understand what they care about, what they're passionate about, what's their particular style or taste. Do they read tabloids? Do they like broadsheets? Do they prefer audiobooks? Do they like to play sort of games, Candy Crush? Do they like to read Shakespeare? So it's finding out who they are, their sort of self-esteem levels, their interests, their hobbies, so we can really communicate with them effectively. Again, knowing what they find funny, on the converse side, what they might find offensive. Who do they aspire to? Who do they relate to? Who do they trust? Who would they listen to? What's their sort of person? What are their ambitions? What do they hope for? What sort of lifestyle is aspirational for them? What sort of things would they like to see changed in the world? Also, what worries them? What would they like to see improved? What would they like to have more of? More security, or perhaps more positivity, or sort of certain things being resolved, certain issues. It could be local issues that bother them. They might be more interested in global challenges such as climate change. So finding out what the customer worries about can also help us to make sure we craft a message that resonates with them. It's also important to find, again, linking to passion, what are they angry about? So in order to find out this or develop this understanding of our audience, we can use secondary data and also a little bit of creativity from persona building. So this there's a green folder on Moodle on week 4, which is all about persona building. Please have a look at the template, watch the video, look at the example personas, go through the stages, because this is one of the most crucial stages in making your whole positive impact project work. You must understand your audience and show that that's based on research. So the different types of research that we can find, because we're not doing primary research for this module, we can look at quantitative data. So quantitative data tends to be data on behaviour. So it can be the occurrence, how often people do things, how many of a certain thing a person owns, how long they've been doing it for. So generally it's acquired through questionnaires, and it's seeking to measure and compare and contrast and look at the population and help us to draw insights. Then we've got research on attitudes, which tends to be qualitative, and this is sort of research that tells us what people care about, why they do things, what they think about. So it really helps us understand the why and what drives people, what motivates people. So if you can find both types of research, that would really help you to build a better picture of your audience. Once we've looked at some research, whether it's Mintel, Statista, Office of National Statistics, journal articles, we can then start to do some empathy exercises and add on and draw a picture, use our creative skills to draw a picture of our ideal audience so we can bring them to life and relate to them like a real person. And that's what we do in terms of persona building. So it's really, really important, because otherwise our message, our marketing communication is not going to be refined, well targeted and nuanced based on the receiver. It's just going to be us making noise as a brand. So you must understand your audience in order to communicate effectively and be good at marketing. So as mentioned, to understand your audience and know how to engage them and to make your messaging effective, you need to understand who they are, what they like, what they find funny, etc. But another way we can understand our audience and their world is by actually looking at competitors. Because when we look at competitors, we can evaluate their offering and their messages, and that gives us an understanding of the noise, if you like, what we need to compete against. So it also sets customers or the audience's expectations. So if you look at a competitor and their messaging is very upbeat and refined and informational, you can think, okay, they've set a standard. If our messaging isn't as effective or isn't as nuanced and well constructed, then we're not going to stand out against that competitor. So competitor research is also helping us understand our audience, because it's helping us understand what they see. So if you undertake competitor research, it will help you stand out and cut through the noise. It could help you differentiate, be better, be different, or be more effective. And it'll also it'll give you an insight into who is already targeting your audience, so you know what sort of communication they're already receiving. So your battle plan is ready. You know who the competition is, and you know what your audience is expecting from you. So just to go back to Schramm's model, so this is a model again developed in the Phil and Turnbull textbook, and it's kind of, I like this model because it really points out the noise aspect. So it's taken the linear model and the message. You've got your realm of understanding, so what we know as the sender of the message. We've got the realm of understanding of the consumer. What do they know about the issue? What do they know about you as a brand? What do they understand about their own needs and how they can satisfy those? And then we have the message, which links us together. And then we have the noise, which is competitors, distractions, interruptions, all those things that could get in the way of our message being received. So again, this brings together nicely the need to do audience research, competitor research, and really understand who we are, what our value is, and what it is we're trying to do or satisfy for the audience. So again, by undertaking audience research, we can be more effective at crafting a message because we know when, where, and what to say. So if we research our audience and find out when they go online, we know when to post our messages, because with some social media, especially if they have a very ephemeral kind of lifespan of messages, having your message posted at the right time can increase the chance that your message is seen by your audience. You also need to know where your audience goes. Do they tend to look at stories? Do they tend to look at the news feed? Which social media platforms do they use? Who do they follow? What websites do they visit? What type of content do they watch? Long form, short form, etc. So by knowing these things or getting a better idea of these things, then again you can be in the right place at the right time. So let's move on to looking at providing value for the audience. So again, as mentioned at the very beginning, providing value very much links to understanding your audience, but it takes it a step further to think about, okay, well, what are we actually offering now we understand our audience? So one way to kind of think about our consumer is the journey that they are on. And most consumer journeys start with discovery. So you discover a new product or a new service, or you discover a solution to a problem that you haven't really even thought about until the scenario is explained to you. Or perhaps it starts with your own problem recognition. This could be something as simple as your stomach grumbling because you're hungry. You realise you have a problem, you need some food. So problem recognition is based on the interaction between two main components: the desired state, so in this example, being satiated with a sandwich, and the actual state, which is right now being hungry. So this, there's a journal article by Brunner and Promezel that's in the reference list. Again, an old classic, some old theory, but still quite relevant and definitely food for thought. Now, advertising works on the whole by providing a message. It quite often offers a solution to achieve that desired state. Advertising can be criticised, though, for actually stimulating that desired state, from taking people who were quite happy with what they were doing or how they were, and actually through either sort of showing them images or their ideal self, perhaps lowering their self-esteem and selling them dreams, whether that's the face cream, the car, or the holiday, so they actually want more. So what's the value of advertising? Are they actually advertisers offering a solution to achieve the desired state, or are they perhaps stimulating that desired state? So adverts tend to use entertainment, they can be emotionally stimulating, they can offer information about their product or their service, or perhaps more information about the problem that you're experiencing. So you think yes, this brand gets me, they understand this problem that I have, or this need that I'm trying to satisfy. Whereas content marketing tends to build brand value by just helping the customer, so giving them something valuable, so informing them, helping them, entertaining them, serving them. So if you remember, I think it was week 3, we looked at different types of owned media, and we looked at different ways you can use Twitter and YouTube and Instagram to provide value and interact in a kind of a meaningful way. And we looked at YouTube and how people find the value from YouTube. So people go to YouTube generally because they're trying to satisfy a need. They have a problem, they've recognized the problem, or they're looking to discover something specific. So they go to look at reviews, hacks and tips, advice and guides, how-to content, unboxing. Again, so this is going back to that original lecture that we did on YouTube. So the content that you produce in terms of providing value can help people feel more prepared. It can help people feel smarter or perhaps inspired. So yes, advertising has a bad rap for stimulating the desired state and making people want more, to consume more products, but also conversely, it can also help them find solutions to problems that they've recognized or needs that they have, or ways that they perhaps might be able to improve or enhance or achieve something that they've always wanted to. So we have to think about what's the value, what is it in our message, what are we offering the customer, and how can we encode that into our message. Okay. So in summary, crafting your message is an audience-centered activity. We really, really, really need to get into the mindset of our audience in order to create an effective message. We need to cut through the noise, so we need to know what competitors are saying, what their message strategies are, in order to be relevant and to be worth listening to. And we need to understand the consumer's cognitive process, so our message is received as intended. So I'm going to leave it there and move on to the next video. So hopefully you've made some notes, and if you have any questions, you can ask those to me either by email or in the afternoon's online seminar.